How do stereotypes form? In this lecture, we're going to examine a number of theories and ideas related to the formation of stereotypes. Each one has its own way of explaining where stereotypes come from. In reality, all of them likely play a role. Let's begin with the basics. Each of us divides our social world into groups, using a process called social categorization. Whether a target belongs to our in-group or out-group makes a difference in how we perceive them. In-groups include all the social groups to which you belong. Out-groups are all the other groups. Some categories, such as race, gender, and age, dominate our perceptions more so than other categories. We sometimes perceive the differences between in-groups and out-groups to be fixed and biologically rooted, even though it may not be the case. People who believe race is a biologically determined characteristic are less likely to interact with racial outgroups and more likely to accept racial inequalities. Using subliminal presentation, researchers have found that the automatic activation of a stereotype is more likely to occur when the perceiver's exposure to the stereotype is high. The more familiar they are, even if they don't believe it, the more likely it will be activated when exposed to the relevant target group. Automatic activation is also more likely when the perceiver's threshold is low, when their stereotypes are easily activated, and third, it's more likely when the perceiver's self-esteem is threatened. One of the consequences of social categorization is that we overestimate the differences between in-groups and out-groups. We don't recognize all the ways in which the groups are similar, and instead focus on the differences. Another consequence is that we tend to favor our in-groups, called in-group favoritism. We prefer our own groups over the groups to which we do not belong. Third, the outgroup homogeneity effect. Even though we recognize that our in-groups are diverse, we tend to think that the outgroup is made up of people who are similar. We assume they're all the same. Some of the reasons this effect occurs are because we are less familiar with the outgroups, and because we do not often interact with a representative sample of outgroup members. The second theory we'll review is the stereotype content model. It suggests that the relative status of a group influences stereotypes about its competence. High status means high competence. It also suggests that the perceived competition within a group impacts stereotypes about its warmth. Low competition means high warmth. Let's look at how these two dimensions interact. The first category is called social reference. It includes our in-groups and the social prototypes of our cultures, like the middle class in the U.S. This group is associated with traits like being caring, honest, dominant, and intelligent. We tend to admire this group and be proud of its members. The second category is called envious prejudice. That's because we tend to be jealous and envious of the group, which includes wealthy people, lawyers, and professional women. This group is assumed to be selfish, dishonest, dominant, and intelligent. The third category is called contemptuous prejudice. We assume this group is selfish, dishonest, submissive, and unintelligent, and we have feelings of disgust and contempt toward its members. Examples include people experiencing poverty, homelessness, or drug addiction. The fourth and final category is called paternalistic prejudice because it's associated with feelings of pity and sympathy. We assume these groups are selfish, dishonest, submissive, and unintelligent. Examples include elderly people, disabled people, and stay-at-home parents. Note that the content of your stereotypes may differ from those presented here. You may not agree with some of these characterizations, and that is in part due to some of the other factors we are reviewing in this lecture. Realistic conflict theory is next. This approach says intergroup competition creates intergroup hostility. More specifically, when multiple groups compete for the same resources, whether it be food, land, or money, it creates negative feelings between the groups. The winners will try to protect their resources, and the losers will be resentful of their losses. Maybe some of you played team sports and were not particularly fond of the teams you competed against. Prejudice can also be caused by perceptions of relative deprivation. That is, the feeling of discontent aroused by the belief that we are worse off than other people. In 1961, Muzaffar Sharif and his colleagues published the results of a field experiment they had conducted at Robbers Cave, a state park in Oklahoma. They recruited 11-year-old boys to participate in a series of outdoor group activities. At first, the researchers split the boys into two groups, and each chose its own name, the Rattlers and the Eagles. Take a moment to pause the lecture and watch the video about Sharif's experiment. As we can see in the video, as soon as the boys were split into two competing groups, they developed negative feelings or prejudice toward the members of the other group. To restore peace, the two groups were exposed to superordinate goals, which are mutual goals that could be achieved only through cooperation. For instance, the two groups had to work together to pull a broken-down truck up a hill. It was not possible for a single group to complete this task. And the fourth theory regarding stereotype formation is called social identity theory. This figure illustrates social identity theory. As you know, the need for self-esteem is fulfilled through personal and social identities. This theory says the tendency to favor our ingroups stems from a need to enhance our self-esteem through personal achievements and affiliation with successful groups. When our self-esteem is threatened, we have a tendency to cling to our ingroups or belittle outgroups with negative stereotypes, just to make ourselves feel better. Of course, all of this can happen without us being aware that we're doing it. Here are two of the factors that influence our tendency to enhance our ingroups to enhance our self-esteem. 1. The more we identify with our ingroup, the more likely we are to use these strategies. 2. The influence of culture can make a difference. Compared to individualists, collectivists are more likely to emphasize other people in their personal and social identities. They are more likely to perceive the distinctions between ingroups and outgroups, and they are less likely to use in-group enhancement to boost their self-esteem. Yet another relevant process is socialization, which is how we learn the norms, rules, and information of a culture or group. When you first start working for a company, for example, you may attend some kind of new employee orientation. This program is designed to teach you about the organization's culture. Through this process, we learn about the stereotypes and prejudices held by members of our ingroup and those held by members of the outgroup. How do we learn these beliefs? Children learn the stereotypes held by their parents and caretakers. Their parents may also behave in ways that are consistent with these attitudes and feelings, which reinforces their existence. They can also learn from media, which tends to perpetuate stereotypes, and these messages are integrated into their identities. In one study, female college students who had just watched a set of commercials in which the female characters were portrayed in stereotypical fashion tended to express lower self-confidence, less independence, and fewer career aspirations than those who viewed stereotype irrelevant or counter-stereotypical ads. As boys and girls develop, they often receive different yet consistent messages from their social environment. In another study by Morangello and Dauber, the data suggested that boys and girls receive different messages from their social environment. The researchers showed mothers videotapes of children engaging in risky playground behaviors and asked them to indicate what they would ordinarily say if it were their own child. Mothers of daughters intervened more frequently and more quickly and were more likely to caution against getting hurt than mothers of sons. And mothers of sons were more likely to encourage their sons' risky behavior. Stereotypes can also form when the perceiver lacks direct or direct contact with the outgroup, when they lack accurate information, and when they lack awareness of their own implicit bias. Negative emotions and negative experiences can also play a role. To avoid the stigma of appearing prejudicial, some people try extra hard to suppress negative stereotypes. Unfortunately, this can backfire, and they end up saying or doing the very thing they were trying to avoid. Some people go so far as to avoid intergroup interactions due to this stigma. Of course, these behaviors serve to perpetuate the negative stereotypes further as the perceivers are not exposed to other perspectives. It's best to simply acknowledge individual differences. In this part of the lecture, we examined some of the ways that stereotypes develop. In the next section, you'll review the ways that stereotypes distort our perceptions.